In a quiet meadow, beneath the warmth of morning sun, a single honeybee emerges from the darkness of her hive. Her body, no larger than a sunflower seed, carries within it the machinery of 1,000,000 years of evolution. She pauses at the entrance, antennae twitching as they sample the air, reading invisible messages written in scent and sunlight. Around her, thousands of sisters are beginning their day, each one a small piece of something far greater than herself. She lifts into the air, wings beating 200 times every second, and disappears into a world of flowers. What she will accomplish today, multiplied across her colony and across millions of colonies around the world, quietly sustains the very fabric of life on Earth. Tonight, we follow her journey and the remarkable story of her kind. Welcome to Bedtime Biology, where science meets serenity. Each night, we explore the quiet wonders of the natural world, calming your mind and sparking your curiosity. If you like these videos, please consider subscribing to the channel and commenting below if you have any feedback or suggestions for topics of future episodes. The honeybee, small enough to rest unnoticed on your fingertip, is a masterpiece of biological engineering. Every curve and structure serves a purpose refined across countless generations. To understand what makes these insects so extraordinary, we must first look closely at how they are built, piece by intricate piece. The body of a honeybee divides into 3 distinct sections: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. Each segment houses specialized structures that allow the bee to navigate, communicate, build, and survive in an ever-changing world. The head contains the brain, a structure remarkably complex despite its tiny size. No larger than a grass seed, yet capable of learning, memory, and decision-making that rivals much larger animals. But perhaps most fascinating are the bee's eyes. Unlike us, with our 2 forward-facing eyes, a honeybee possesses 5. 2 large compound eyes dominate the sides of its head, each composed of thousands of tiny hexagonal lenses called ommatidia. These compound eyes detect motion with exceptional precision and allow the bee to see the world in a way utterly foreign to human experience. While we see the spectrum of colors from red through violet, honeybees see from green through ultraviolet, a range that reveals hidden patterns on flower petals invisible to us. Many flowers have evolved ultraviolet markings that act like landing strips, guiding bees directly to the nectar at their centers. Between the compound eyes sit 3 smaller simple eyes, called ocelli, arranged in a triangle atop the bee's head. These ocelli don't form detailed images, but instead detect changes in light intensity, helping the bee maintain orientation during flight, and navigate using the sun's position even on partly cloudy days. The precision of this visual system becomes clear when you consider that a foraging bee can remember the exact location of productive flowers and return to them day after day, navigating across landscapes that stretch for miles. But honeybee vision extends beyond simple light detection. Recent research has revealed that bees can detect the polarization pattern of sunlight, a feat that seems almost magical. Sunlight becomes polarized as it passes through Earth's atmosphere, creating patterns that vary depending on the sun's position. Even when clouds obscure the sun itself, these polarization patterns remain visible, at least to eyes capable of perceiving them. Honeybees use this ability as a backup compass, allowing them to orient themselves and navigate accurately, even when direct views of the sun are blocked. The mechanisms underlying this ability involve specialized photoreceptors in the ocelli and regions of the compound eyes, though scientists are still working to fully understand how bees process and use this polarized light information. The integration of all these visual inputs, compound eyes sampling the environment with thousands of individual lenses, ocelli tracking overall light levels and polarization patterns, happens in the bee's brain in real time during flight. The bee must process this information while flying at speeds that can exceed 15 miles per hour, making split-second decisions about where to land, whether a flower is worth visiting, and how to return home. The computational power required is remarkable, especially when you consider that the bee's entire brain weighs less than a milligram and operates on the energy equivalent of a few grains of sugar. The antennae, two flexible jointed appendages extending from the bee's face, serve as multifunctional sensors. Within each antenna are approximately 170 odor receptors, giving honeybees an extraordinarily refined sense of smell. They use these antennae to detect the chemical signatures of flowers from considerable distances, to recognize members of their own colony versus intruders, and to sense pheromones, those invisible chemical messages that coordinate the activities of thousands of individuals within the hive. Interestingly, honeybees show a preference for using their right antenna when communicating with other bees through touch, a lateralization similar to handedness in humans. Though the reason for this asymmetry remains one of the small mysteries in the study of bee behavior. The bee's mouthparts are equally specialized. The mandibles, which look like small jaws, manipulate beeswax during comb construction, help clean the hive, and can deliver defensive bites when necessary. But the most remarkable structure is the proboscis, a complex arrangement of multiple parts that fold together to form a straw-like tube. When a bee encounters nectar deep within a flower, it extends this proboscis, which can reach lengths longer than the bee's own head, and draws the sweet liquid into a specialized stomach. This honey stomach, separate from the bee's digestive stomach, serves solely as a transport vessel, allowing the bee to carry nectar back to the hive without digesting it during flight. Moving to the thorax, the middle segment of the bee's body, we find the center of its mobility. This box-like structure contains powerful flight muscles and serves as the anchor point for 6 legs and 4 wings. The wings themselves are engineering marvels. Made of thin, transparent membrane, they beat in a figure-8 pattern, rather than simply flapping up and down. This complex motion generates enough lift to keep a bee airborne, despite its relatively heavy body, laden with pollen or nectar. 2 larger forewings connect to 2 smaller hindwings through tiny hooks called hamuli, allowing all 4 wings to move as a single surface during flight. The legs deserve their own moment of appreciation. Each of the 3 pairs serves specialized functions. The front legs feature comb-like structures specifically designed for cleaning the antennae, those critical sensory organs that must be kept free of dust and debris. The middle legs help with general grooming and movement across the comb. But it's the hind legs that capture the imagination. These legs sport pollen baskets, technically called corbiculae, formed by curved hairs surrounding a smooth, slightly concave surface. As a bee moves from flower to flower, pollen clings to the hairs covering her body. She uses her legs to brush this pollen downward and pack it into these baskets, where it accumulates in bright balls of yellow, orange, or even blue, depending on which flowers she has visited. Watching a heavily laden bee return to the hive, her pollen baskets bulging with these colourful provisions, you witness one of nature's most efficient harvesting systems in action. The abdomen, the final and largest segment, contains most of the bee's vital organs. Here we find the digestive system, including the true stomach, where the bee processes her own food. Wrapped around these organs is a system of tubes called tracheae that deliver oxygen directly to every cell. Unlike mammals, which use blood to transport oxygen, insects bring air directly into their tissues through small openings called spiracles that dot the sides of the abdomen. This system, while limiting the maximum size an insect can achieve, works with remarkable efficiency at the bee's scale. Deep within the abdomen of worker bees and the queen lies the reproductive system, though in workers it remains undeveloped under normal circumstances. Also tucked into this segment are 8 wax glands, small pockets on the underside of the abdomen that secrete the raw material for comb construction. When worker bees consume honey, these glands produce small, clear flakes of wax that emerge through tiny pores. The bees then harvest these flakes, chew them to make the wax pliable, and mold them into the hexagonal cells that will become the foundation of their home. And finally, there is the stinger, perhaps the feature most associated with bees in the human mind. In worker bees, the stinger is barbed, equipped with backward-facing hooks that anchor it in mammalian skin. When a worker bee stings, these barbs catch, and as she tries to fly away, the stinger tears from her abdomen, along with the attached venom sac and muscle tissue. The detached stinger continues to pump venom into the wound even after the bee has departed, maximizing the defensive effect. But this defense costs the worker her life. The queen's stinger, by contrast, is smooth, allowing her to sting repeatedly without injury to herself, though she uses it primarily against rival queens, rather than in colony defense. Drones, the male bees, possess no stinger at all, being entirely harmless despite their somewhat intimidating size. This intricate anatomy serves a being that never exists in isolation. A honeybee is always part of something larger, a superorganism where thousands of individuals function as cells in a single living body. To understand honeybees, we must understand not just the individual, but the society she belongs to. Inside a thriving hive live 3 distinct forms of honeybee, each with its own anatomy and destiny. The queen, the workers, and the drones together create a social structure so complex and interdependent that no individual could survive alone for more than a few days. This is eusociality, one of evolution's most remarkable innovations. At the center of everything is the queen. She is physically distinct from her daughters, the workers, with an elongated abdomen that can stretch even further when she is actively laying eggs. Her wings, when folded, cover only about 2/3 of her abdomen, whereas worker wings reach nearly to the tip. Though she possesses the ability to sting, her smooth stinger is reserved almost exclusively for combat with rival queens. Those rare moments when a hive produces multiple queens and only one can survive to rule. The queen's primary function is reproduction. During a brief window early in her life, usually within the first week after emerging from her cell, she embarks on mating flights. On these flights, she mates with multiple drones, often 10 to 20 males, sometimes more. Each mating occurs in midair in special areas called drone congregation zones, where males from many different hives gather in the sky waiting for virgin queens. The act of mating is fatal for the drone. His reproductive organs tear away as the queen departs, and he falls to the ground to die. But the queen carries forward what he has given her. She stores the sperm from all her mates in a specialized organ called the spermatheca, where it remains viable for years, potentially for the entire span of her life. From that point forward, the queen never mates again. Yet, she may live for 2 to 5 years, and during that time, she will lay up to 2,000 eggs per day during peak season, drawing from her stored supply of sperm to fertilize each egg. Fertilized eggs develop into female bees, workers, or future queens, depending on how they are fed. Unfertilized eggs develop into drones. This means that male bees are haploid, possessing only one set of chromosomes from their mother, while females are diploid, with genetic material from both parents. This unusual system of sex determination has fascinating implications for the genetic relationships between siblings and creates peculiar patterns in bee family trees. But the queen contributes more than eggs to her colony. Her body produces a complex blend of pheromones, chemical signals that emanate from her mandibular glands and other sources. These pheromones permeate the hive, passed from bee to bee through grooming and contact, and they serve as a kind of chemical glue that holds the colony together. The presence of queen pheromones suppresses the development of worker bees' ovaries, preventing them from attempting to lay eggs themselves. It signals the hive's health and vitality. When the queen ages and her pheromone production declines, or when she dies unexpectedly, the workers sense this absence immediately. Within hours, they begin the emergency process of creating a new queen, selecting very young larvae and feeding them exclusively with royal jelly, a protein-rich secretion that triggers the developmental pathway toward queenhood. The workers, daughters of the queen, make up the vast majority of the hive's population. In a strong colony during summer, there may be 60,000 workers or more, and every one of them is female. They are smaller than the queen, with specialized anatomy that allows them to perform the diverse tasks that keep the colony functioning. Unlike the queen, workers possess fully developed pollen baskets on their hind legs and functioning wax glands. Their lives are short, particularly during the active foraging season, when they may live only 5 to 7 weeks, their bodies worn out by constant labor. What makes worker bees remarkable is not just what they do, but how their roles change as they age. This phenomenon, called temporal polyethism, means that a worker bee's job shifts predictably over the course of her life. When she first emerges from her cell as a soft, fuzzy young adult, she begins with housekeeping duties. For the first few days, she cleans cells, removing debris and polishing them for the next generation of eggs. As she matures, glands in her head begin producing royal jelly, and she takes on the role of nurse bee, feeding larvae and tending to their needs with constant attention. Around 12 days old, her wax glands activate, and she joins the construction crews, building new comb or repairing damage to existing structures. She may also take on the job of receiving nectar from returning foragers, processing it into honey through repeated regurgitation and the addition of enzymes from her saliva. As she approaches 3 weeks of age, she graduates to guard duty, standing at the hive entrance and challenging any bee that approaches. Guards can distinguish members of their own colony from strangers by scent, and they attack intruders without hesitation. Only in the final weeks of her life does a worker become a forager, leaving the relative safety of the hive to venture into the outside world in search of nectar, pollen, water, or propolis, a sticky resin that bees collect from trees and use to seal cracks in the hive. This progression is not rigidly fixed. If the colony's needs change, workers can shift roles. If there are too few nurse bees, older workers can reactivate their brood-feeding glands and return to nursing. If foragers are lost to predators or bad weather, house bees can begin foraging earlier than usual. The colony adapts as a whole, and individual bees adjust their behavior to meet collective needs. Then there are the drones, the males of the species. Drones are stockier than workers, with barrel-shaped bodies and enormous eyes that meet at the top of their heads. These large eyes give them the visual acuity needed for their one function: finding and mating with virgin queens during high-speed aerial pursuits. Drones contribute no labor to the hive. They cannot sting, they do not forage, and they do not build comb. House bees must feed them directly, offering them honey mouth to mouth. Their entire existence is dedicated to the possibility of mating. When spring arrives and the colony's population grows, workers begin building larger cells specifically for drone production. Drones develop from unfertilized eggs over a period of about 24 days, longer than the 16 days required for a worker. The development itself follows a fascinating trajectory. Like all honeybees, a drone begins as an egg laid by the queen. This egg, because it is unfertilized, contains only the queen's genetic material, making the drone haploid with just 16 chromosomes, rather than the 32 possessed by female bees. The egg hatches, after 3 days, into a small white larva. Nurse bees feed this larva a mixture of secretions and pollen, and it grows rapidly, molting several times as it outgrows its skin. By day 10, the larva is fully grown and begins to spin a cocoon around itself. Worker bees seal the cell with a cap of wax, and inside this sealed chamber, the larva transforms into a pupa, undergoing metamorphosis as its larval body dissolves and reforms into adult structures. Wings develop, legs elongate, eyes shift to their adult positions, and internal organs reorganize. Finally, after 24 days from the laying of the egg, the adult drone chews through the wax cap and emerges into the hive. For the first few days after emergence, the young drone is soft and his coloration is light. He wanders the hive, feeding on honey provided by workers, and his body hardens and darkens. Around day 12, he becomes sexually mature and begins taking orientation flights, learning the landmarks around the hive so he can find his way home. By day 14 or 15, he is ready to join the daily ritual of the drone congregation. On warm afternoons, typically between 1 and 4 o'clock, drones from across a region gather in specific aerial zones. These congregation areas are remarkably consistent from year to year, often forming in the same locations, though how drones know where to go remains somewhat mysterious. They may be drawn by pheromones from other drones, or perhaps they orient to landscape features. Researchers have found congregation areas as small as a few dozen meters across, or as large as several hundred meters, positioned anywhere from 5 to 40 meters above the ground. Here, the drones fly in circuits, waiting. If a virgin queen enters the congregation area, the drones detect her by sight and scent and immediately give chase. The queen may mate with 10 to 20 drones during a single nuptial flight, sometimes more. Each mating occurs in flight and lasts only seconds. When a drone successfully couples with the queen, he experiences what can only be described as explosive ejaculation. All the blood in his body rushes to his reproductive organs, causing his endophallus to avert with such force that it tears away from his body. He falls away, dying, while the queen flies on to mate with the next drone. She carries with her the torn genitalia of her mates, which act as a mating sign, a temporary plug that must be removed before the next drone can mate with her. The drones that fail to mate during the afternoon return to their hive, where they are fed by workers and allowed to rest. They will try again tomorrow and the day after day, through the weeks of summer when queens are flying. Most will never succeed. The odds are simply too low, with hundreds or thousands of drones competing for each queen, and relatively few queens taking mating flights on any given day. The vast majority of drones live out their lives without ever fulfilling their biological purpose. But this tolerance for drones is seasonal. As autumn approaches and food becomes scarcer, the workers turn on the drones, driving them from the hive. Unable to feed themselves and barred from re-entering, the drones die of starvation or exposure. It seems cruel by human standards, but it represents the colony's ruthless efficiency. Drones are expensive to feed and serve no purpose during winter, when queens do not mate. The colony cannot afford to support them when survival itself becomes uncertain. Come spring, if the colony has survived, new drones will be raised to continue the cycle. The life of a drone is one of idle waiting, punctuated by a single moment of desperate competition, and for most, it ends not in the glory of reproduction, but in exile and death as the seasons turn. These three castes, so different in form and fate, work together to create something that transcends any individual. The hive itself becomes a kind of organism, maintaining its own temperature, defending itself, reproducing through swarming, and adapting to changing conditions. Each bee is, in a sense, a cell in this larger body, and understanding this helps us appreciate what happens next. Among the many remarkable abilities honeybees possess, perhaps none has captured human imagination quite like their dance language. It is a form of communication so sophisticated, so rich in information, that when it was first decoded, many scientists found it difficult to believe. The story of this discovery belongs largely to Carl von Frisch, an Austrian ethologist who began studying bee behavior in the early 20th century. Through patient observation and elegant experiments, von Frisch demonstrated that when a forager bee returns to the hive after discovering a rich source of food, she performs a dance on the surface of the comb. And this dance contains precise information about the location of that food source. The dance encodes both the distance to the flowers and the direction relative to the sun's position that other bees must fly to find them. For this work, von Frisch shared the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1973. The waggle dance, as it came to be called, unfolds as a figure-8 pattern. The bee walks forward in a straight line while waggling her abdomen from side to side and buzzing her wings. She then circles back to the starting point, either to the left or the right, and repeats the waggle run. The length of this waggle run encodes distance. A short run, lasting perhaps half a second, indicates that flowers lie nearby, perhaps 100 meters away. A longer run, lasting several seconds, indicates resources much farther from the hive, potentially a kilometer or more. Researchers have found that the relationship is remarkably consistent. Every additional second of waggling roughly corresponds to another kilometre of distance. Direction is communicated through the angle of the waggle run relative to vertical on the comb. Bees perform these dances in the darkness of the hive, so they cannot see the sun directly. Instead, they use gravity as their reference point. If the bee waggles straight upward on the comb, she is indicating that foragers should fly directly toward the sun. If she waggles at an angle of 30 degrees to the right of vertical, other bees should fly at a 30-degree angle to the right of the sun's position. 45 degrees to the left of vertical means fly 45 degrees to the left of the sun. The precision is astonishing. But the waggle dance communicates more than just location. The vigor of the dance, how many times the bee repeats the waggle run, and how enthusiastically she performs it, indicates the quality of the food source. A bee that has found an exceptionally rich patch of flowers will dance with great energy, repeating her message many times and attracting more followers. A mediocre food source earns only a brief, half-hearted dance. In this way, the colony allocates its foraging force efficiently, sending more workers to the best available resources. Recent research has revealed that this sophisticated communication system is not entirely innate. Young bees learn to dance by watching older, experienced foragers. In an experiment conducted in China, researchers created artificial colonies composed only of young bees that had never had the opportunity to follow dances before they themselves began foraging. When these bees later attempted to dance, their performances were disordered and contained significant errors in both angle and distance encoding. The angle errors improved with practice, but the distance encoding remained permanently impaired. Bees that grow up in normal colonies, able to follow hundreds of dances before their first foraging trips, dance correctly from the start. This discovery transformed our understanding. The waggle dance is not simply an instinct hardwired into bee genetics. It is a learned behavior, culturally transmitted from one generation to the next. Scientists have also found that individual bees have unique dancing styles, small variations in how they execute the standard pattern. Fascinatingly, these individual differences actually improve the success of recruitment. If every bee danced exactly the same way, followers might all interpret the message identically and converge on a single spot. But because each bee adds her own slight variation, followers fan out across a slightly broader area, increasing the chance that at least some of them will successfully locate the flowers. Diversity in communication style, it turns out, benefits the colony as a whole. The dance also incorporates other forms of communication. As the dancing bee waggles, she produces sounds by vibrating her wings, creating pulses that other bees can detect through sensory hairs. She also releases pheromones, chemical signals that alert nearby bees to pay attention. Recent studies have discovered that waggle dancing bees produce specific hydrocarbons, molecules that distinguish them from non-dancing foragers returning from the same food source. When researchers collected these compounds and released them into a hive artificially, more bees left to forage, suggesting these chemicals actively recruit workers. For food sources very close to the hive, within about 10 to 15 meters, bees perform a different dance called the round dance. In this simpler pattern, the bee circles in one direction, then reverses and circles in the opposite direction, repeating this several times. The round dance doesn't encode direction. It simply tells other bees that good food exists very close by, and they should search the immediate vicinity. Between the round dance and the full waggle dance exists a transitional form performed for resources at intermediate distances. Bees also use the waggle dance in contexts beyond food. When a colony swarms, a process where the old queen and roughly half the workers leave to establish a new hive, scout bees search for suitable nest sites. Upon finding a promising cavity in a tree or rock crevice, a scout returns to the swarm, which clusters on a branch or other surface, and she performs a waggle dance right on the surface of the swarm itself, trampling over her sisters to deliver her message. Different scouts may dance for different potential sites, and through a process that resembles democratic decision-making, the swarm eventually reaches consensus, with more and more scouts dancing for the best site until a threshold is reached, and the swarm moves as one to its new home. Even with all that researchers have learned, mysteries remain. Not every bee that observes a dance acts on the information. In fact, studies suggest that only about 10% of potential recruits actually use the dance information to locate food sources. Many bees, it seems, prefer to return to flower patches they already know, relying on their personal memory, even when being offered information about new, potentially better, resources. There is a cost to following social information. It requires learning, interpreting, and flying to an unfamiliar location. Sometimes, especially when a bee already knows where to find food, sticking with what works may be the safer choice. The dance language, for all its sophistication, is not a command, but an offer of information that individual bees may or may not choose to use. What remains undeniable is that honeybees have evolved one of the most complex communication systems known outside of human language. It is symbolic, meaning that the dance represents something spatially and temporally removed from the bees in the hive. It is learned and culturally transmitted, and it allows a colony of insects to coordinate the activities of thousands of individuals, efficiently exploiting an environment that changes from day to day, from hour to hour. In the darkness of the hive, surrounded by the hum of thousands of wings and the warmth of thousands of bodies, bees dance the location of distant flowers, and their sisters understand. Before bees can dance, before they can store honey or raise brood, they must first build their home. The construction of the honeycomb is itself a feat of collective engineering that has fascinated mathematicians, architects, and biologists for centuries. Honeycomb is built from beeswax, a substance that worker bees produce within their own bodies. Young bees, roughly 12 to 18 days old, possess 8 wax glands on the underside of their abdomens. When the colony needs new comb, these workers gorge themselves on honey. The consumption of honey triggers the wax glands, which begin secreting tiny flakes of wax through small pores in the bee's exoskeleton. Each flake is roughly the size of a pinhead, clear and brittle when first produced. The bee reaches back with her legs, plucks the wax flake from her abdomen, and passes it forward to her mandibles. There, she chews the wax, mixing it with saliva and warming it with her body heat until it becomes soft and pliable. The transformation requires considerable energy. Scientists estimate that bees must consume approximately 8 pounds of honey to produce 1 pound of wax. This is why established colonies are so valuable to beekeepers. The existing comb represents an enormous investment of resources, and reusing it allows the colony to divert energy toward honey production rather than rebuilding their infrastructure every year. As the bee works the wax, she adds it to the growing structure of the comb. Multiple bees work simultaneously, each contributing her small piece to the collective project. The result is one of the most recognizable patterns in nature, a repeating grid of hexagons, cells that fit together without gaps, creating a strong, efficient structure. Why hexagons? This question has intrigued thinkers since ancient times. The Roman scholar Marcus Terentius Varro theorized that bees chose hexagons because they are the most efficient shape for packing space. Many centuries later, the mathematician Thomas Hales provided mathematical proof of what has come to be called the honeycomb conjecture. Among all possible ways to divide a plane into equal-sized cells with the minimum perimeter, the hexagonal pattern is optimal. In practical terms, this means that hexagons use the least amount of wax to create the maximum amount of storage space. But the question of how bees achieve this geometric perfection is more complex than it might first appear. Do bees somehow calculate angles and lengths, or does the hexagonal pattern emerge from simpler behaviors? Research suggests the latter. When bees first begin building, they create circular cells. These circles are packed closely together, each one surrounded by 6 neighbors. As the bees continue to work, they heat the wax, either by putting their thoraxes into the cells, or by warming specific areas where multiple cells meet. The wax, warmed and pliable, flows under the influence of surface tension and the mechanical pressure from the bees' activities. The circular cells gradually deform into hexagons as their walls push against each other and find an equilibrium shape. This process doesn't require bees to understand hexagonal geometry. They simply follow a building program, creating cylindrical cells at regular intervals, and physics does the rest. The final honeycomb, with its precise angles and uniform cells, emerges from the collective behavior of hundreds of bees following relatively simple rules, guided by the material properties of warmed beeswax. The cells themselves are not perfectly uniform. Worker bees build cells of one size for raising worker brood and storing honey and pollen. But when the colony needs drones, workers construct larger cells, about 25% bigger in diameter. The queen, sensing the size of the cell beneath her with her legs, knows which type of egg to lay. In a small cell, she releases a fertilized egg that will become a worker. In a large cell, she lays an unfertilized egg that will develop into a drone. Queen cells, the special chambers in which new queens are raised, are not hexagonal at all, but rather elongated and peanut-shaped, hanging vertically from the comb like stalactites. The orientation of the cells also deserves attention. Honeycomb cells are not built vertically like cups, but instead tilt upward at a slight angle, roughly 13 degrees above horizontal. This upward tilt prevents honey from dripping out before the cells are capped with wax. The back of each cell is not flat, but composed of 3 diamond-shaped plates that meet at angles calculated to provide maximum strength with minimum material. When viewed from both sides of a comb, the bases of cells on one side nestle into the gaps between cells on the other side, creating a structure where both surfaces share the same wax, further economizing on materials. The construction proceeds remarkably quickly when resources are abundant. During a strong nectar flow, when flowers are producing copious amounts of nectar and weather permits constant foraging, A colony can build several frames of new comb in just a few days. The bees work around the clock, and the hive becomes almost uncomfortably warm as they generate heat to keep the wax at the optimal temperature for molding, somewhere between 33 and 37 degrees Celsius. Watching bees build comb, especially if you have the opportunity to observe through an observation hive with glass sides, reveals something profound about the nature of collective intelligence. No single bee designs the comb. No individual understands the overall structure or plans its architecture. Each bee responds to local cues, the presence of other bees, the temperature of the wax, the smell of the queen, the level of food stores. Yet, from these local interactions, a global pattern emerges. The honeycomb, strong enough to support many times its own weight, waterproof, antibacterial, due to the natural properties of beeswax, and geometrically optimized to use resources with maximum efficiency. It is architecture without an architect, engineering without a blueprint, order arising from the organized chaos of thousands of individuals doing what evolution has prepared them to do. With their home constructed, the bees turn to filling it with the substance that gives them their name: honey. The process by which nectar becomes honey is a transformation as remarkable as any in nature, turning a watery, perishable liquid into a concentrated, stable food that can last for years. It begins with flowers. Flowering plants produce nectar as an enticement, a sugary reward offered to attract pollinators. The nectar sits in specialized structures called nectaries, often deep within the flower, where visiting insects must brush past stamens and pistils, picking up or depositing pollen in the process. Nectar composition varies by plant species, but it typically contains water, accounting for 50 to 80% of its volume, along with sugars, primarily sucrose, and trace amounts of vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and aromatic compounds that give each type of nectar its distinctive flavor. A foraging bee lands on a flower, extends her proboscis, and draws the nectar into her honey stomach. This is not her digestive stomach, but a specialized storage organ that can expand significantly to accommodate a load of nectar. The bee continues visiting flowers, always of the same species during a single foraging trip, until her honey stomach is full, or she has gathered as much as she can carry. Then she orients herself, using the sun's position and her memory of landmarks, and flies back to the hive. Upon arriving, the forager does not immediately deposit the nectar into storage cells. Instead, she seeks out a house bee, a younger worker, whose job is to receive and process nectar. The two bees touch antennae, and the forager regurgitates a droplet of nectar from her honey stomach into the house bee's mouth. This transfer happens quickly, a brief exchange, and then the forager departs, either to rest briefly or to fly out for another load. The house bee now begins the transformation. She finds a quiet spot in the hive and regurgitates the nectar onto her mouthparts, creating a small bubble. She holds this bubble exposed to the warm air of the hive, allowing some water to evaporate. She also adds enzymes from her salivary glands, primarily invertase, which begins breaking down the complex sugar sucrose into simpler sugars, glucose and fructose. After manipulating the nectar in this way for perhaps 30 minutes, she either passes it to another house bee for further processing or deposits it into a cell. At this stage, the nectar is far from finished. It still contains too much water. If stored in this condition, it would ferment as yeasts, and bacteria consumed the sugars and produced alcohol and acids, spoiling the food. To prevent this, the bees must reduce the water content to approximately 18%, the threshold below which most microorganisms cannot survive. The dehydration process harnesses the collective effort of the colony. House bees spread the nectar thinly across the surfaces of many cells, maximizing exposure to air. Bees station themselves throughout the hive and fan their wings, creating air currents that carry moisture away. The temperature inside the hive, maintained at around 35 degrees Celsius by the metabolic heat of the bees themselves, accelerates evaporation. This process is energetically expensive. Researchers have calculated that bees must metabolize a significant portion of the sugar in nectar, sometimes 25 to 60%, to generate the heat and airflow needed for dehydration. Recent studies have revealed that bees may begin evaporating water from nectar even before returning to the hive. Observations of bees on flowers showed that they sometimes remain on a flower much longer than necessary to extract all available nectar, during which time the nectar in their honey stomachs becomes measurably more concentrated. By partially dehydrating nectar while still in the field, bees reduce the amount of work required inside the hive and improve overall efficiency. As the days pass, the nectar gradually thickens. Bees move it from cell to cell, consolidating partially processed nectar and continuing the evaporation process. They add more enzymes each time it passes through a bee's honey stomach. Glucose oxidase, another enzyme introduced during processing, slowly converts some of the glucose in the honey into gluconic acid and hydrogen peroxide. The hydrogen peroxide is unstable and eventually breaks down, but it provides temporary antibacterial protection. The gluconic acid lowers the pH of the honey to around 3.9, creating an acidic environment where few microorganisms can thrive. Finally, when the honey reaches the optimal consistency and water content, the bees seal it. They secrete fresh wax and use it to cap the cell, creating an airtight seal that prevents moisture from re-entering. These capped cells, gleaming white against the golden honey visible through the wax, represent the colony's insurance policy against lean times. During winter, when no flowers bloom and bees cannot leave the hive for weeks or even months, they will open these cells and consume the honey they labored so hard to create. A strong colony may store 50 pounds of honey or more, far exceeding what they need to survive, which is why beekeepers can harvest the surplus without condemning the bees to starvation. The flavor and color of honey depend entirely on the flowers that supplied the nectar. Honey made from clover nectar is typically light in color, with a mild, sweet taste. Orange blossom honey carries the delicate fragrance of citrus. Buckwheat honey is dark, almost molasses-like, with a strong, earthy flavor. Some honeys, like those produced from certain eucalyptus species, contain unique compounds that give them medicinal properties. New Zealand's Manuka honey, made from the nectar of the Manuka tree, contains methylglyoxal at concentrations far higher than typical honeys, giving it exceptional antibacterial activity. Every jar of honey represents an extraordinary collective effort. A single bee, over her entire lifetime, produces about 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey. To create 1 pound of honey, bees must visit approximately 2 million flowers. A colony that produces 50 pounds of surplus honey in a season has visited roughly 100 million flowers, and its foragers have flown a combined distance equivalent to several times around the Earth. All this effort compressed into those hexagonal cells, each one a small jar of concentrated summer, waiting in the darkness for the moment when it will sustain the colony through the cold months ahead. But honey represents only part of the bees' contribution to the world. Their greater gift, though invisible and often unappreciated, is pollination. Every time a honeybee visits a flower to collect nectar or pollen, she provides a service of incalculable value. As she crawls across the flower's surface, pollen grains, each one containing male plant DNA, stick to the thousands of hairs covering her body. When she visits the next flower, some of this pollen brushes off onto the stigma, the female part of the flower, and fertilization occurs. The flower will now produce seeds and, in many cases, fruit. This is pollination, and without it, most flowering plants could not reproduce. While wind can move pollen for some species, and other insects and animals also serve as pollinators, honeybees are unmatched in their sheer numbers, their efficiency, and the diversity of plants they visit. In temperate regions, honeybees are responsible for pollinating an estimated 80% of all flowering plants, including more than 130 types of fruits, vegetables, and nuts. The numbers, when laid out, are staggering. In the United States alone, honeybee pollination contributes more than $15 billion annually to agricultural production through increased crop yields and improved crop quality. Globally, the value of crops that depend on insect pollination, with honeybees playing the dominant role, exceeds $200 billion per year. Some crops, like almonds, are almost entirely dependent on honeybee pollination. California's almond industry, which produces over 80% of the world's almonds, requires the temporary import of more than 2 million bee colonies each year, brought in from across the United States during a narrow window in late winter when the almond trees bloom. This represents the largest coordinated pollination event in the world. But the impact extends far beyond commercial agriculture. In natural ecosystems, honeybees help maintain plant diversity, which in turn supports diverse communities of other animals. Many wildflowers, shrubs, and trees depend on bee pollination, and the seeds and fruits these plants produce feed countless species of birds, mammals, and insects. The loss of pollinators can trigger cascading effects through an ecosystem, unraveling food webs and reducing biodiversity. Honeybees are not the only pollinators, and in some contexts, they may not even be the most effective. Many crops benefit from the services of native wild bees. Bumblebees, solitary bees, flies, beetles, butterflies, and other insects. Research has shown that wild pollinators often transfer pollen more effectively per visit than honeybees. A single visit from a bumblebee, for instance, may result in better fruit set than a single visit from a honeybee. However, honeybees make up for any deficit in per-visit effectiveness through sheer numbers. A strong honeybee colony can field tens of thousands of foragers per day, providing a level of pollination service that wild pollinators, with their smaller populations, cannot match. This is particularly true in agricultural settings where large monocultures of a single crop plant bloom all at once, creating a massive but temporary demand for pollination. Wild pollinator populations, which must sustain themselves year-round, cannot expand to exploit such brief windows of abundance. Managed honeybee colonies, by contrast, can be trucked to fields just as crops bloom and removed afterward, providing intensive pollination exactly when and where it is needed. The relationship between agriculture and honeybees has grown increasingly complex. Modern farming practices often create landscapes that are difficult for bees. Fields planted with single crop species offer abundant food during bloom, but nothing before or after. Hedgerows and wildflower strips, which once provided continuous forage throughout the growing season, have been removed to maximize planting area. The use of pesticides, while essential for controlling crop pests, can harm bees directly or impair their ability to navigate, forage, and reproduce. Honeybees are now asked to work in environments that are often far from ideal, and this places them under considerable stress. Yet, they persist, providing what may be the most essential ecosystem service on Earth. When you eat an apple, a strawberry, a cucumber, or an almond, you are eating the fruit of pollination. When you spread honey on toast, you are tasting the distilled essence of flowers, transformed by bees through their labor. 1/3 of the human diet, 1 bite in every 3, exists because of pollinators, and honeybees are the hardest workers among them. The gentle hum of bees in a flowering tree is not merely a pleasant sound. It is the sound of the world being renewed, of seeds being formed, of life continuing. Without it, our tables would be bare and our fields empty. But this essential partner in our survival now faces challenges that threaten its very existence. In the fall of 2006, commercial beekeepers across the United States began reporting something strange. When they opened their hives, they found them nearly empty. The adult worker bees had vanished, leaving behind only the queen, a few remaining nurse bees, and ample stores of honey and pollen. There were almost no dead bees in or around the hive, no obvious signs of disease, nothing to explain where the workers had gone. The hives simply emptied, the workers disappearing as if they had flown away and never returned. Beekeepers called it by various names at first: disappearing disease, fall dwindle, the Mary Celeste syndrome. Eventually, researchers settled on a term that captured the sudden and mysterious nature of the phenomenon: colony collapse disorder, or CCD. The initial reports suggested losses of 30 to 90% of hives, numbers far higher than normal winter die-off. As media coverage spread, CCD became a symbol of a broader environmental crisis, a warning that even our most indispensable partners in agriculture were in peril. The search for a cause began immediately. Researchers examined every possibility. Was it a new pathogen? Israeli acute paralysis virus was detected in many collapsed colonies. Was it parasites? The varroa mite, a tiny arachnid that feeds on bee blood and has devastated colonies worldwide since its arrival in North America in the 1980s, was present in most affected hives. Was it pesticides? Bees were being exposed to dozens of different agricultural chemicals, some of which were known to be toxic, others whose effects were less well understood. Was it poor nutrition? Modern agricultural landscapes, dominated by monocultures, offered abundant food during bloom, but left bees starving at other times of year. Was it stress from migratory beekeeping, the practice of trucking hives thousands of miles to pollinate different crops in different seasons? The answer, frustratingly, appeared to be all of the above and more. Colony collapse disorder was not caused by a single factor, but by the interaction of multiple stressors. A colony weakened by poor nutrition might become more vulnerable to disease. Pesticide exposure, even at levels that did not kill bees outright, could impair their immune systems or disrupt their ability to navigate. making them more susceptible to parasites. Varroa mites transmitted viruses as they fed, and a colony already stressed by other factors might succumb to viral infections it could otherwise have survived. One study evaluated 61 potential factors and found that no single stressor stood out as the primary cause of CCD. Instead, colonies that collapsed had more pathogens and more types of pathogens than healthy colonies. It was the cumulative burden, the weight of multiple challenges bearing down on the bees simultaneously, that pushed colonies beyond their ability to cope. Among the many threats, Varroa destructor, the Varroa mite, emerged as perhaps the most persistent and damaging. This mite, originally a parasite of the Asian honeybee, jumped to the European honeybee in the mid-20th century and has since spread worldwide. Female mites enter cells containing bee larvae just before the cells are capped. Inside the sealed cell, the mite feeds on the developing bee's hemolymph, essentially its blood, and lays eggs. Her offspring mature inside the cell, feeding alongside her. When the young bee finally emerges, it carries adult mites that will spread to other bees and other cells. Varroa mites weaken bees directly through blood loss and the damage they cause to developing pupae. But their greater harm comes from the viruses they transmit. Deformed wing virus, a pathogen that causes bees to emerge with crumpled, useless wings, spreads rapidly in mite-infested colonies. Affected bees cannot fly and usually die within days. An unmanaged colony infested with Varroa mites will almost certainly die within 2 to 3 years, and severe infestations can kill a hive in mere months. Beekeepers must actively manage mite populations through various treatments, though the mites are developing resistance to some of these treatments, creating an ongoing arms race. Pesticides, particularly a class of chemicals called neonicotinoids, have received intense scrutiny. These insecticides are systemic, meaning plants absorb them, and the chemicals spread throughout all tissues, including pollen and nectar. Bees foraging on treated crops consume neonicotinoids in small doses. At high doses, these chemicals are acutely toxic, but even at sublethal levels, they can have insidious effects. Studies have shown that neonicotinoids can impair bees' ability to navigate, making it harder for foragers to find their way home. They can reduce learning and memory, making bees less efficient foragers. They can suppress immune function, leaving bees more vulnerable to disease. Some research suggests that colonies exposed to neonicotinoids are more likely to be abandoned during winter, though whether the pesticide exposure directly causes abandonment or simply weakens colonies so that other stressors finish them off remains a subject of debate. The European Union implemented restrictions on neonicotinoid use in 2018, citing the potential threat to bees. In the United States, regulatory approaches have varied, with some neonicotinoids facing increased restrictions, while others remain widely used. The science is complex and sometimes contradictory, in part because real-world exposure involves not a single chemical, but a cocktail of different pesticides, and the effects of these combinations are difficult to predict. Habitat loss compounds all these other stressors. As wildflower meadows are converted to cropland, as hedgerows are removed, as suburban lawns replace diverse flowering plants with manicured grass, bees lose the sources of food they need outside the brief windows when crops are in bloom. A honeybee colony requires a continuous supply of pollen and nectar from early spring through late fall to build up the population and the honey stores necessary to survive winter. When that continuous supply is broken, colonies weaken, and weak colonies are less able to withstand disease, parasites, or pesticide exposure. Climate change adds another layer of uncertainty. Changes in temperature and precipitation patterns can cause flowers to bloom at times when bees are not yet active, or to fail to bloom at all. Extreme weather events, droughts, floods, unseasonable frosts, can wipe out forage or prevent bees from leaving their hives. Changing climate may also allow pests and diseases to expand into new areas or to remain active for longer portions of the year. It is important to note that reports of colony collapse disorder in the specific form observed in 2006 and 2007 have declined significantly. By 2013, the percentage of colony losses attributed to CCD had dropped from about 60% of total losses in 2008 to around 31%. More recent surveys often do not mention CCD at all as a significant factor. This decline may reflect changes in beekeeping practices, improvements in mite management, or shifts in the environmental factors that contributed to the initial wave of collapses. However, overall colony losses remain high. Winter losses in the United States have averaged around 28 to 30% annually for the past 2 decades, more than double the rate that beekeepers consider economically sustainable. Beekeepers compensate by splitting hives to create new colonies, by purchasing replacement bees, and by working harder to keep their operations viable. But the attrition takes a toll, both economic and emotional. The total number of managed honeybee colonies in the United States has declined from about 5 million in the 1940s to roughly 2.7 million today, a trend driven by multiple factors including economic pressures, the loss of small-scale beekeeping, and the increasing difficulty of keeping bees alive. Wild and feral bee colonies, those living in tree hollows or other natural cavities without human management, fare even worse. Without beekeeper intervention to control varroa mites, most feral colonies die within a few years of infestation. This means that the reservoir of wild bees that once existed in many regions has largely vanished, and the pollination services they provided have disappeared with them. Yet, honeybees persist, sustained by the efforts of beekeepers and the resilience bred into them by millions of years of evolution. They continue to fly, to forage, to build, and to reproduce, even as the world around them changes in ways they were never adapted to face. The question is whether we can change as well, can modify our agricultural practices to be less harmful, can preserve and restore the habitats they need, can reduce the toxic burden we place on their tiny bodies. The answer matters not just for bees, but for ourselves. Their fate and ours are intertwined in ways we are only beginning to fully understand. As our journey through the life of honeybees draws to a close, it is worth pausing to consider what we have seen. An insect barely the length of your fingernail, weighing less than 1/10 of a gram, carries within its body an architecture of stunning elegance. 5 eyes that see into the ultraviolet, antennae capable of detecting single molecules of scent, a brain the size of a sesame seed that can learn, remember, and make decisions. She lives as part of a society more complex than most humans ever encounter. A superorganism of tens of thousands of sisters, coordinated by chemical signals and symbolic dances, building cities of wax with mathematical precision, transforming nectar into honey through collective alchemy. She flies from flower to flower, and in doing so, she ensures the continuation of the plants that feed her and that feed us. She does not know she is essential. She does not understand that 1/3 of human food depends on her work. She is not trying to save the world. She is simply doing what evolution has prepared her to do, following instincts and learned behaviors that have proven successful across countless generations. Yet, the cumulative effect of her small life, multiplied across billions of bees, is nothing less than the sustaining of terrestrial ecosystems and human civilization. There is something profound in this, something worth carrying with you as you drift towards sleep. The smallest beings can be the most essential. The quietest work can be the most vital. A creature that lives only a few weeks and never travels more than a few miles from its birthplace can be connected to the entire world through threads of dependency and consequence we are only beginning to trace. The relationship between humans and honeybees stretches back into prehistory. Cave paintings in Spain, created more than 8,000 years ago, depict people harvesting honey from wild bee colonies, climbing to precarious heights to raid nests in cliff faces. Ancient Egyptians kept bees in clay hives and transported them along the Nile to follow the flowering of different crops, practicing a form of migratory beekeeping that continues today. Honey appeared in religious ceremonies, in medicine, in the preservation of food. Beeswax lit temples and palaces, its clean flame and pleasant scent making it the preferred illuminant for millennia before the invention of electric light. For most of this long history, humans took from bees. We robbed their nests, often destroying colonies in the process. The development of movable frame hives in the mid-19th century, most notably the Langstroth hive, revolutionized beekeeping by allowing honey to be harvested without destroying the comb or killing the colony. This innovation made beekeeping more sustainable and more productive, enabling the expansion of commercial honey production and, crucially, the development of pollination services as a distinct agricultural industry. Today, we ask more of honeybees than ever before. We transport them across continents, expect them to thrive in monoculture deserts, blooming for just a few weeks each year, expose them to chemical cocktails that would have been unimaginable to beekeepers a century ago. In return, we provide them with boxes to live in, treatments for their parasites and diseases, and supplemental feeding when natural forage is lacking. It is a partnership, but one increasingly fraught with tension as environmental pressures mount. What can be done? The answers are both simple in concept and complex in implementation. At the individual level, anyone with even a small patch of earth can plant flowers that bees favor. Native wildflowers, herbs like lavender and thyme, fruit trees and berry bushes all provide valuable forage. Avoiding or minimizing pesticide use in gardens helps protect bees and other pollinators. Even a single flowering plant on a balcony contributes, a tiny oasis in an otherwise barren landscape. At the agricultural level, changes are harder but increasingly recognized as necessary. Integrated pest management, which uses pesticides only when needed and chooses the least harmful options, can reduce chemical exposure. Planting hedgerows and field margins with diverse flowering plants provides bees with continuous forage throughout the season. Leaving some areas of farmland unploughed or minimally managed creates habitat for ground-nesting native bees. These practices require changes in how we think about agriculture, valuing ecosystem health alongside crop yield, but they are not impossible. Many farmers are already implementing them, finding that healthy pollinator populations improve their harvests. Policy changes matter as well. Regulations that restrict the most harmful pesticides, support for research into bee health, funding for habitat restoration, all of these contribute to creating an environment where bees can thrive. The European Union's restrictions on neonicotinoid use represent one such approach, though debate continues about whether the measures go far enough or might have unintended consequences for crop production. Education plays a crucial role. Many people fear bees, associating them primarily with stings and seeing them as pests to be eliminated. Understanding that honeybees are generally gentle, that they sting only in defense of their hive or when directly threatened, and that they provide irreplaceable services can transform fear into appreciation. Teaching children about the importance of pollinators creates a generation more likely to protect them. When people understand the connection between bees and their food, between healthy bee populations and functioning ecosystems, they are more likely to support conservation efforts. Research must continue as well. We still do not fully understand many aspects of bee biology, behavior, and health. Why do some colonies resist varroa mites better than others? Can we breed bees that are more resilient to modern stresses? How do the complex interactions between pesticides, pathogens, nutrition, and environmental factors affect colony health? What role does genetics play in determining a colony's ability to survive? Each question answered opens new questions, and the work continues in university labs and research apiaries around the world. When you next see a bee on a flower, pausing in her endless labor to gather a few grains of pollen or a drop of nectar, you are witnessing one small moment in a story that is both deeply personal, the story of that individual bee, and impossibly vast, the story of flowering plants and the animals that pollinate them, a relationship that has shaped the world for over 100 million years. You are seeing an insect that has been studied, admired, and depended upon by humans since before recorded history began, and yet one that continues to surprise us, continues to reveal layers of complexity and beauty we never suspected. Perhaps that is the final lesson honeybees offer, that the natural world, even in its most familiar corners, even in creatures we think we know well, contains depths we have not yet plumbed. Every bee that hovers at a flower is a small mystery, a small miracle, a small but crucial thread in the fabric of life. The hum of her wings is not merely sound, but a fundamental note in the great symphony of existence, and without it, the music falls silent. And if these quiet explorations into the lives of honeybees have helped you unwind, or given you a new appreciation for these remarkable insects, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. Your thoughts and suggestions for future topics are always welcome in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and may your sleep be as peaceful as a hive in winter, warm and safe, and full of quiet life. Sweet dreams.